Is death just the beginning? Death. A word that arouses fear, but also curiosity. It is the only certain thing in our lives, and yet it remains the greatest mystery of humanity. What happens when we die? Does consciousness fade forever, or is there something beyond the edge of life? Since the dawn of time, people have tried to answer this question. The ancient Egyptians believed that after death, the soul went to the underworld, where it underwent the judgment of Osiris. In Norse mythology, warriors who fell in battle were supposed to go to Valhalla, where they would feast until the end of time. Christianity speaks of heaven, hell, and purgatory, while Buddhism teaches the idea of reincarnation, a cycle of birth and death that continues until we achieve enlightenment. But what if none of these theories are true? What if death is not the end, but something else entirely that we don't yet understand? There are people who claim to have experienced death but come back to tell what they saw. There are stories of ghosts, of children remembering their past lives, and of scientists investigating whether consciousness can exist outside the body. In this episode, we take a look at the most intriguing cases and theories about the afterlife. Is there evidence that death is just the beginning? Part 1. Returns from the afterlife. People who returned. Can you die and come back? Thousands of people around the world say they can. They have experienced clinical death, the moment when their heart stops beating and their brain shows no activity. They should have died, and yet they have come back, and their stories are eerily similar. One of the most famous cases is that of Dr. George Ritchie, who experienced clinical death at the age of 19. He claimed to have left his body and traveled through an unknown world. He described beings full of light, boundless peace, and a feeling of overwhelming love. Similar stories were reported by others who had brushes with death. They spoke of a tunnel with a bright light at the end, of meetings with deceased loved ones, and even of being able to review their entire lives in a split second. Raymond Moody, a physician and researcher, has spent decades analyzing these accounts. His 1975 book, Life After Life, ignited a global debate about clinical death. He found that people from different cultures, faiths, and backgrounds had nearly identical experiences. Does this mean there really is something on the other side? Skeptics say these are just hallucinations of the brain dying from lack of oxygen. But what if it's more than that? Some patients have described events that happened in the hospital room, even though they were dead at the time. How could they have known? Is death a passage to another dimension, or just a trick of our mind? Part 2. Ghosts and apparitions. Evidence of life after death. Do ghosts exist? This question has intrigued people all over the world for centuries. Accounts of encounters with beings from the afterlife appear in every culture. Some claim to have seen apparitions of their loved ones. Others hear mysterious voices or feel an invisible presence. Is this just a figment of our imagination, or proof that death does not mean the end of existence? One of the most famous cases is the Perron family, whose fate became the inspiration for the film, The Conjuring. In the 1970s, they moved into an old house in Rhode Island, where almost immediately strange things began to happen. Moving objects, mysterious whispers, and even physical attacks on the household. The case was investigated by famous demonologists, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who concluded that a dark entity was in the house. Many paranormal researchers believe that ghosts may be residual energy from the dead that for some reason have not left our world. Often, there are so-called residual ghosts, which do not communicate with people, but repeat certain actions as if they were a recording played on a loop. Others believe that some spirits can interact, pass on information, warn, or even influence objects in the physical world. There are recordings, photos, and records of spiritualistic sessions that supposedly capture the presence of entities from another dimension. Is this just an illusion or actual proof that something remains after death? Part 3. Reincarnation. Can you be born again? Can you live more than once? The idea of reincarnation, or the rebirth of the soul, has existed in many cultures and religions for thousands of years. In Hinduism and Buddhism, It is believed that our current life is just one of many, and that death is not the end, but a transition to another incarnation. But is there evidence that reincarnation is real? One of the most famous cases is that of James Leininger, a boy who, from a young age, spoke of his previous life as a fighter pilot in World War II. James knew technical details about aircraft that he should never have known. He described combat missions and even mentioned the names of former comrades in arms. After years of research, it was possible to confirm that his memories matched those of the deceased pilot, James Houston. Professor Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, has spent more than 40 years studying cases of children who claim to remember their past lives. He has documented more than 2,000 stories in which children knew details about people, places, and events that they could never know in their present lives. In many cases, their memories were so accurate that their past life families have been traced. Skeptics say it's the result of suggestion or coincidence. But how do you explain situations in which children describe facts that no one taught them? Is it possible that our consciousness does not disappear after death, but simply begins a new journey? Part 4. A scientific view of life after death. Can life after death be scientifically proven? In a world where facts and evidence matter, this topic is highly controversial. However, research into consciousness and near-death experiences is yielding fascinating results that could change our perspective on the end of human existence. One of the most well-known scientists on the subject is Dr. Sam Parnia, who has conducted extensive research on clinical death. His team analyzed cases of patients who were declared dead but came back to life. Some of them claimed to see their bodies from above, hear doctors talking, and remember details that were later confirmed by witnesses. How is this possible when the brain is supposed to be completely inactive at the time? Quantum physicists are also beginning to ask questions about the nature of consciousness. According to some theories, such as those of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, human consciousness may be more than just a product of brain activity. It may exist independently of the body and operate in another dimension of reality. Another intriguing experiment was a study by Dr. Bruce Grayson, who analyzed the accounts of people who had experienced clinical death. Many of them described not only a tunnel of light, but also a feeling of complete separation from the body. The question arises, is consciousness simply energy that passes into another state of being after death? While modern science does not provide clear answers, a growing body of research suggests that death may be more than just the end. Are we on the verge of a discovery that will change everything we know about human existence? Part 5. Death in different cultures and religions. How do different cultures and religions view death? Although each civilization has its own beliefs, one thing remains constant. Death is never seen as a simple end. For some, it is a transition to another dimension. For others, a cycle of rebirth in new incarnations. In ancient Egypt, death was merely a gateway to eternal life. The dead passed through the court of Osiris, where their hearts were weighed on divine scales. If they were pure and light, the soul could enter paradise, the field of reeds. Otherwise, it was devastated by the monster Ammit. That is why mummification and funeral rituals were so important. They were supposed to ensure a safe journey to the afterlife. In Norse mythology, warriors who died in battle went to Valhalla, where they feasted and prepared for the final battle, Ragnarok. Those who died in other ways went to Helheim, the grim world of the dead ruled by the goddess Hel. According to Hinduism and Buddhism, death does not mean the end of existence, but a transition to another life. According to the law of karma, each incarnation is a consequence of the previous one, and the ultimate goal of the soul is liberation from the cycle of samsara and reaching nirvana, a state of perfect peace. Christianity and Islam teach the existence of heaven and hell. In both religions, after death comes a judgment that decides the fate of the soul. However, there are also concepts of purgatory, a temporary place where souls can atone for their sins. The differences are enormous, but one thing remains common. No culture treats death as an absolute end. Does this mean that something actually awaits us on the other side? Death is one of the greatest mysteries of humanity. Is it the end of everything? or just the beginning of a new journey? Analyzing the accounts of people who have experienced clinical death, stories of ghosts and apparitions, cases of reincarnation, and scientific theories about consciousness, it is difficult to clearly determine where the truth lies. Perhaps our consciousness does survive death, but in a form we do not yet understand. Maybe reincarnation is real, and after death the soul moves on to another body, and life is an endless cycle. Or maybe what people see after clinical death is just a game of our brain, which in its last moments creates the illusion of another world. Scientists have been studying this topic for decades, but the answer remains elusive. All we know is that countless witness accounts describe experiences that don't fit the known laws of reality. Some religions speak of heaven and hell, others of reincarnation, and still others of a transition to the spirit world. But what if all of these visions are just a piece of a larger puzzle? Maybe the reality after death is something the human mind cannot fathom. All we can do is wait until science finds the answers, or until we find out for ourselves. And what do you think about it? Do you believe that there is something more waiting for us after death? Let me know in the comments, subscribe if you want, and see you in the next episode.